Sydney Blu, and I am a DJ, a Canadian DJ. I've been touring in the United States since 2008. And I feel like it's appropriate, just in case there's a lot of you who might not know who Change the Beat is, to say that I run a nonprofit organization called Change the Beat, which elevates women in the electronic music space, because women are severely underrepresented in this space. When I started DJing, we were at 2% of all DJs, and now we are much higher percentage than that. But still, to this day, it's still a very unequal playing field for women in electronic music. So what we do at Change the Beat is we get women signed to record labels through partnering with dance labels, and we have a big community of female producers and gender nonconforming producers, and we help underrepresented artists, and that is what Change the Beat is. So I just wanted to say that, just in case there's anybody here who doesn't know what this is, what our organization is about. But yes, that being said, I'm really excited to be interviewing Kimya Zahedi today from CoveyLaw. Covey has been my legal immigration attorney since I basically got my very first O1 in 2008. So I'm really excited to have her here. She's once again an attorney with CoveyLaw's Performing Arts Division. Prior to joining CoveyLaw, Kimya work focused on corporate and family-based immigration. She holds a BA from Sarah Lawrence College, from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and a GD from Fordham University School of Law. Very nice, Kimya, where she focused on international law, human rights, and immigration. In addition to her work at CoveyLaw, Kimya serves on the board of directors at civic arts nonprofit Waterwell, which is dedicated to civic-minded theater education, and performing arts. And with that all being said, welcome, Kimya, to our Change the Beat Masterclass series.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sydney. Thank you for having me. I'm just going to start with a quick intro about today's session and about Covey. Immigration is complex, and we can't really provide comprehensive coverage of any topic in something like this. So our disclaimer is that the information we provide today should not be taken as legal advice, which can only be given regarding the circumstances of a specific case. So we'll be giving you the best information we have. And if you want to reach out with specific questions we haven't answered, please feel free to do that. Please note that if you're watching this video after April 15th, 2026, some information could be outdated by the time you hear it. So again, just given all of the changing policies in immigration law, especially at this moment, please reach out to us for updates if that's the case.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's hop right into it, because there's a lot of people here and it sounds like everyone wants to know what it takes to tour in the United States. So I guess my first question for you would be, for artists who are completely new to the US and touring, what do you think is like the biggest misconception you see about visas and immigration?
That it's quick. That is not the case, unfortunately, especially not now. And I think especially artists who are, returning to the process and have done this many times, the landscape has shifted a lot, and they're not necessarily aware of how much longer the process is taking now. And for, artists who are just starting to think about touring in the US, I think often they'll imagine that it's maybe similar to other countries, and it's not. So that would be the major misconception. Let me just X out of my email. And, with today's session, I hope that's not intimidating, because while it does take a little while, and it is hard to navigate with preparation, with information, when you're armed with all of that, it's navigable. So.
Is there just, I'm asking this question off the cuff, is the processing, the expedited processing fee like a thing for all countries, or because I know it's a factor for when I reapply?
Some countries have, extremely fast and easy visa processes and don't even require, an expediting process at all. Others do. The US happens to be one of the more difficult places for performing artists to obtain visas. And that's just something to know as you're thinking about and preparing for the process, that I wouldn't necessarily go into the process thinking it must be like so and so country. It is its own unique.
Flower.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, cool. So at what point do you think in an artist like planning process, should they start thinking seriously about visas, documentation, border preparation?
I would say for individuals who are at the beginning of their careers, who know they one day want to tour in the US, it's honestly always a good time to look into the types of materials that would strengthen an O or P visa petition, so the performing artists visas. Um, and that's because it's actually something good to know in order to help you build the right portfolio. A lot of artists don't realize the importance of press, for example, in a visa petition, and are extremely successful in booking great venues and put a lot of effort into that aspect of their career and come to us with very slim, press evidence. And it's harder to put together a petition that way. So I actually think that for emerging artists, artists earlier in their career, or artists who are just starting to think about touring in the US, it's never too early to look into the kinds of evidence and materials that can help strengthen your petition. If you are an artist who has a more established performing history and a longer career and are further along in your career, I would say reach out to an attorney around 14 months in advance if you want a chance to avoid the very expensive premium processing fee, which is now $2,965. And I know that sounds like a really insane amount of time to get started on a visa in advance, especially because oftentimes your dates are very far from being set, etc. But getting started doesn't mean that you necessarily need to have everything set and planned. One of my main pieces of advice is to never make any assumptions. Don't assume that you need something when you don't know for sure an attorney hasn't told you. Don't assume that you need signed contracts in order to get started. Don't make any assumptions. Just the second you start thinking about touring in the US, I would reach out to an attorney who can help you gauge whether right now is the right time, whether you have enough material and information to get started or not.
Good point. And it's interesting too because electronic, just for the electronic artists in the group here, electronic artists music press is actually not that difficult to get. There's so many easy blogs that like you can literally write them with a press release if you have a decent release out or whatever, and you can get a press article written about your new release. So maybe think about that if you have some releases coming up. I'm just throwing this in, and you want to start getting some press and you're thinking, oh, like it's so hard to get it. It's actually not that hard. Because sometimes I'll send a press release over to a blog like Music is for Lovers or Electronic Groove, and they'll do a little article about it. Sometimes they charge like $30 or $50, but it's worth getting that press so you have it just in case you do need it in the future to apply for a visa. So that I chime in.
Yeah, I will say, and hopefully we go through some of the really helpful evidence that people can put together. Keep in mind that we can't use articles that are the same wording across different publications, and oftentimes press releases. And this is actually one of the common mistakes that we see, or not mistakes, but something that gets in the way of a strong petition of, managers or artists assuming that any press is good press, and it's not really true. So if you have a bunch of, different music blogs that all have the exact same press release published, we'll only be able to use one of those. So we'll get into that, but I just wanted to say because it came up.
Okay. When preparing a visa application for a trip, this is actually the next question. When preparing for a visa application for a touring artist, what kinds of evidence or supporting materials tend to matter the most?
So the first one is future U.S. work evidence. It is the kind of essential requirement of a petition. And I'll try to demystify that as best I can today. There are various different ways that you can show future US work. And one of them is to have work agreements. And these are very, very casual signed documents between either presenters or venues or promoters and an artist. And it doesn't resemble necessarily a formal contract, although it can. It just needs to have some really essential information, which is date of an engagement, how much an artist is getting paid, the address or location of the work engagement, and that's kind of it. Language authorizing the petitioner if an outside petitioner is filing the petition. And if you're using our law firm, we provide a work agreement template that's extremely thorough. It's very short. It has everything it needs and nothing more. And we provide that to individual artists. What we need as far as frequency of US work engagement is generally we recommend having a US work engagement at the very beginning of your visa duration, one at the very end of your visa duration, and then at least one every 4 months in between. So it's actually not that much contracted work that you need in order to file the petition. If you're filing with work agreements, that might mean you have one work engagement from one venue at the beginning of your visa duration, one work agreement from a different venue at the end, and a third for the work engagements in the middle. It can also be the same employer. It can be the same presenter venue doing multiple US work engagements. So there's different ways to do that. An alternative to that is if you have a booking agent who is booking your US work, whether they're foreign or based in the US, that agent can act as your US employer as far as the petition goes. And we also provide a template for that. Very, simple, has all the information that you need. It needs to be signed by the artist as well as the agent. And then a third alternative that we see less frequently is people who are signed to a label can often have their label act as their US employer. And the argument there is that in order to fulfill your contract with the label, you need to work in the US. And for that, we typically require a label contract signed by the artist and the label. And then we ask for an additional letter, kind of like explaining the context. We see that less frequently. It's a little riskier than the first two options that I just mentioned. I do want to say that for a P visa, which is for a group, it covers a group of artists, performing artists, that has a maximum duration of 1 year. Whereas an O visa, which covers an individual artist, has a maximum duration of 3 years. So if you want the full 3-year duration, you're going to need to show projected work for 3 years, which brings me to my last point about this, which is that none of these dates need to be set in stone, confirmed US work engagements. And this actually is a common misconception that I think artists and their teams have. We need agreements that are in good faith that can be subject to change. So they're not set in stone. The government recognizes that the industry does not operate this way, that a touring artist does not set their schedule 3 years in advance and have nothing change. So there's some, level of flexibility there. The underlying guiding principle should be that it is real, that the artist team or the agent is in contact with these venues, that the venues know what is actually going on here, and that if in the off chance that USCIS was going to reach out to one of the venues, they would know, or the presenters or the promoters, they would know what is being discussed. So that's that. And then I'll quickly run through the other important evidence types. Press is a huge one. The bigger the publication, the more well-known or recognizable the publication, the better. And yeah, the more press, the better. The other thing is putting together evidence of past performances as well as future performances at notable venues, at notable festivals. So festivals and venues that we can find articles about or that have some recognition or reputation on the internet, so that we can show both that individual performed there and also that venue or festival event, et cetera, is like recognized within the industry as being significant. And then any sort of reviews, any sort of awards, any sort of lists. If a person has been chosen by another artist as like year's best, any sort of best of list, Spotify stats we've been using a lot, YouTube views we've been using a lot. And then the last one is testimonials. Actually, there's one more. Testimonial letters are very important. We provide templates for people, so a lot of guidance around what exactly is needed. And I think it's fairly easy for an artist to follow our guidelines and write about themselves. And then often they will send that letter to someone they know within the industry. And that could be really anyone within the industry that we can find information about online. That's an appropriate person to write your testimonial. Obviously, the more like important sounding, the better, but it could really be anyone who is within the industry who we could find a bio or something about online. And the last one, which I forgot about, is contracts. If an individual is getting paid more than like the average artist, and we actually do use the statistics from the US of what artists, the median and mean artists are getting paid in the highest paying states. If an individual is getting paid more than that, we can often use that as evidence to support their petition too.
Very cool. Very cool. So that's a lot of stuff to keep in mind, but I don't think any of it's unattainable. So good stuff. Cool. So that was basically the next question. So I'm going to skip to what are some of the most common mistakes artist managers or teams make when preparing for touring, US touring?
I would say that they get started too late, which puts them in a position where they may have to cancel shows. I think it might be valuable for me to just walk through some of the potential roadblocks and delays.
Yeah.
So looking at an idea of why it actually does take this long. The first reason to get started early is obviously what I mentioned earlier, which is like you have the best chance of avoiding the premium processing fee the earlier you get started. Right now, we're seeing regular processing take 10 months or more, and in most cases. And that's a really long time. So you should assume that, if you want to avoid premium, to have a chance, you should get started over a year in advance. I would say up to 14 months in advance.
Wow, that's
I know. But the reason, even with premium processing, because a lot of people have just accepted that this is the cost of doing business, and they put that cost into what they have budgeted for a visa, even if you are filing with premium processing, which guarantees a response within 15 business days. The response could be a request for more evidence. It doesn't have to be just an approval or a rejection. It could also be they want more from you, which takes time often. We will have to request more evidence from an artist. In some cases, it's evidentiary evidence, which means we're asking for more press or we're asking for more evidence of past work, et cetera. And then we have to draft a response, send that to the government, and then the 15-day business day premium processing clock restarts when they receive the RFU response. So that 15 business days can often take, around a month, depending on how it falls in the month. So it can often take around 2 months or a little more if there is an RFE. So even with premium processing, the petition period can take a while. Beyond that, there's consular processing. Once you receive a petition approval, you have to do an interview if you're outside of the US at the US consulate where you have citizenship or residency. And that process also has its own share of possible delays. There can be delays in scheduling. There might not be availability in the consulate that you're looking at or embassy that you're looking at. And you want to make sure that you are giving yourself a good chunk of time where you are available so that you can find an interview that works for you. So that we usually recommend leaving around 3 to 4 weeks for consular processing where you are available in that place so that to basically account for that possibility of a delay. And then once you do the interview, it could take up to around 10 days often to receive your passport back. And that's something to account for as well. One more thing I don't want to say mistake, honestly, because it's putting the fault on the artists and their team when really, like, how could anyone know these things? It's so difficult to navigate. But one common thing that I see is people forgetting or maybe not realizing the significance of criminal history in this process. It's important to make note of that to your attorney very early on, as early as you can, to get a sense of whether that might pose another delay. Right now, we're seeing more scrutiny and the government being more strict around criminal history. And that's not to say that it's, you're unable to get a visa if you have a criminal history. That's absolutely not the case. But it does require preparation. It does require certain strategies and conversations with your attorney to figure out, is this the kind of criminal history that's going to delay this process by a year? Or is this the kind of criminal history that might not even pose any delay at all? So that's another thing. And then what else can I think of? There's right now, did you ask about mistakes or did you ask about things that people need to be aware of right now?
I asked about mistakes.
Okay.
But
So I'll leave it there.
Okay. Okay, so another question about communicating. So what do you think artists should know about communicating with border officials and presenting their materials when entering the US for work?
Okay, so we've now talked about the petition process, which is putting together all of the eligibility evidence and material, filing it with the government. So we're going to go through that process. You've been approved, presumably, and then you set up your interview at the US consulate or embassy. That applies to you. You do your interview, you have your visa, you get your passport back, you have your visa, and now you are entering the US. There's one more hurdle to cross, which is going through US immigration at the airport. It's very subjective. The US CBP officer has a lot of discretion They can ask you really any questions that they want. And it's always our recommendation that an individual is only answers the questions that they're asked. So there's no need to provide more information than exactly what you are being asked. And we also recommend that individuals don't lie. And those are our two main recommendations. If you are confused about your US entry, for example, you're not sure if you are on an O2 visa, and that is a support personnel, essential support personnel for an O1, and you're not really sure what an O2 means, you don't know what your number is, what your petition number is, etc. You should. So those are things that you should be prepared um, with and know as you are entering the US. Another thing is you should not be entering the US on a work visa if you don't have upcoming work. That's very important. That's something that can really get you in trouble. And a lot of people don't realize, they think like if I have an O1 or if I have a P1, I can just use that and enter the US whenever. And that's not the case. If you're entering for an extended period of time with no work, you should be entering on a visitor or tourist visa.
Got it.
And yeah, so that's important, and that's something that a CBP officer might ask about. They very frequently ask about what you're coming here to do. And you should be prepared to explain the kind of work that you're doing. And you want to make sure that that work is actually covered by your visa. So if there's any questions about that, for example, if you're a DJ and you are coming here to do something other than perform music, teach music, something related to you being a musician, that's something to consult with your attorney about and figure out is this actually covered by my visa, so that you don't encounter a problem when you're going through CBP.
Nice. Um, I would like to just say that from my own experiences, one thing that I noticed the communication problem breaking down, which was my own fault, was I have Nexus and I was not on top of keeping my visa updated into my Nexus. And you also have to do it with your passport. Like whenever you get your passport updated or your Nexus updated, or your visa updated. All of those things have to be connected with each other. And so, if anybody has Nexus or Global Entry or whatever, I just wanted to say that it's important that you probably, if you get a new visa, your visa is renewed, you have to contact Nexus and you have to contact, well, you don't have to contact the passport office, but you do have to contact Nexus and show them your updated visa, because you start getting a lot of questions if it's not all lining up. And that was a problem that I was unaware of. And I was having issues like getting into the country a lot. They were asking me a lot of questions and they were confused. And then I realized because it wasn't syncing. So that,
Wow, that's really helpful for me. Yeah.
yeah, it was.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that was something that I was like, why is every single time I'm going through them saying it's not updated, it's not updated? Turns out it wasn't updated. And so then I thought I was going to have to drive to Niagara Falls to get it updated, because I have done that before to update my passport with my Nexus. Because the only way you can update it at the airport here is if you're actually taking a flight. So you have to be on the other side. The Nexus office is on the other side of going through customs. So in Toronto, if you need to update your Nexus, you have to drive to Niagara Falls. That's the closest. So I would rent a car and drive to Niagara Falls to update it. For whatever reason, I called the office and I'm like, I do not want to have to drive all the way to Niagara Falls. Let me see if I can try to do this over the phone. And they did it over the phone. And so I'm so grateful that that happened. But yeah, there was some weird stuff going on every time I was entering for a bit, but it got fixed after I talked to them. So yeah.
Wow.
Nexus is important. I highly recommend if you can get Global Entry or Nexus to get it. It makes a huge difference, especially if you're a touring artist. But
There was something else. Oh, I was going to say that artists they often don't know that they can enter the US up to 10 days in advance of their visa start date and stay up to 10 days after their visa end date. And that's the grace period that the US government offers to O&P visa holders. The thing is, you often have to request that when you're going through immigration and, communicating with a CBP officer. So if you want to make sure, for example, you have a flight scheduled 5 days after your visa expiration date, so it falls in the 10-day grace period, you want to make sure that the immigration officer actually grants you that grace period. So it's something that you have to request and communicate to them. And then just to make sure that they did give it to you, we recommend that every person after entering the US check their I-94 document online. It's very easy to do. We can actually provide a link I'm sure we can provide a link in the chat for where you can access it. You just put in your, first and last name, country of citizenship, passport number, and it will generate your most recent I-94. And you just check the admit until date, which is the date that you are allowed to be in the US until, and check if it's 10 days after your visa expiration, and then you're all in the clear. And it's not that big of a deal. If they haven't granted it to you, you can reach out to your attorney or directly to the airport and ask for a correction.
okay. How should artists think about the difference between getting your visa approved and actually being prepared for border entry?
So I kind of walked through the
Yeah.
3 steps, but I'll go through it again. Your petition is the set of materials that we are filing with the government to show that you are eligible, and meet the eligibility criteria for the visa you're applying for. The interview is essentially to make sure that you don't meet any of the inadmissibility categories. So you're not inadmissible. In other words, you are not on a terrorist watch list. You don't have a criminal history of the kind that the government deems inadmissible. Certain things like that. So the interview is kind of like the mirror image of the petition. The petition shows that you're eligible. The interview serves to, in large part, make sure that you're not ineligible. And then the last thing is going through CBP or immigration at the airport or port of entry. And that's sort of the last, check to make sure that everything is in order, that you're actually coming to work, that you are, in fact, you are not inadmissible, that the interview didn't miss anything, etc. So it's kind of the final check. And usually people are fine. We have a pretty large data set when it comes to performing artists entering the States. And I think people are frequently much more scared of that interaction than what we actually see in practice. Which is not to say that, it doesn't require preparation and, an understanding and knowledge of what could possibly be asked of you, but it's just to relieve people of that kind of like really heightened fear that I think we see a lot, that I don't always think is warranted.
Okay. What sorry, have recent changes in the US immigration processes or enforcement created new realities that artists and their teams need to be aware of right now?
Yeah. It's yes. I wish that the answer was no, but it's definitely a resounding yes. Um, I'll walk through some of them. One is that premium processing is almost always a necessity if you need a visa within 10 to 12 months. And that's something that people should always budget for nowadays. It's $2,965 per petition. So if you are filing one petition for a group or an individual performer, that's one premium processing fee. But if you are filing an O1 and an O2, or a P1 and a P1S, or a P3 and a P3S, that's two premium processing fees. So it's important that people budget for that. The second is that USCIS has paused immigration benefits applications, so really any sort of immigration request, for individuals born in or citizens of 40 countries. And those are the 40 countries on the travel ban list. That's the full travel ban list as well as the partial travel ban list. So at this point in time, we are pretty much not, we are able to file petitions for those individuals, but they are not going to receive responses. That process is paused for those individuals. So those are individuals from a very long list of countries that we can also put into the chat or disseminate to people later. But if you want to look it up, it's the partial and full travel ban countries. People born in or citizens of those places are currently not able to receive responses on petitions. That's huge. So for dual nationals or people who, for example, were born in Iran and live in Canada or France and don't have any ties to Iran whatsoever, don't even have a passport from there, those individuals are still affected by that policy. The other is that USCIS is issuing more RFEs, that's requests for evidence, than in the past. And I talked about that earlier, but it poses the possibility of delays. And that's just something that I think people should know. One, to sort of get them started a little earlier, but also to recognize that if you are receiving an RFE, so many other people are too. It's often they just issue them, and sometimes they're completely erroneous. They make absolutely no sense. Oftentimes they are seemingly a little more legitimate, but they can do that for any reason. So they are issuing more RFEs, and it does pose the possibility of a delay. The other is that USCIS is taking a bit longer to issue receipt notices and approval notices. So people who have done this a million times in the past are often frustrated, and we see that their feeling is, why is this so much slower than it used to be? And it's just that there are delays in like almost every process that we go through in obtaining a visa these days. So that's just something else to notice and to note. And then the last thing I'll say is that we're seeing, and I mentioned this already too, but more scrutiny around criminal history in the consular process. So in the interview process. So that's just, again, if you have any sort of criminal history whatsoever, if you're like, do I have a criminal history? I remember this time when I bring that up with your attorney really early to try to get ahead of it.
Okay. I'm going to give you one final question, and then there's a bunch in the chat, and I think we want to give some people some opportunities to ask some questions. So if you could leave artists with one checklist or mindset for approaching US touring for 2026 or 2027, if you don't have a visa yet, what would be the essential priorities?
I feel like I keep belaboring this point, but I would say get started really early, around 14 months in advance if you're trying to avoid premium processing. Don't be shy about your accomplishments. Don't make assumptions. You should never assume that somewhere that you performed is not, good enough or reputable enough. Provide that information and allow an attorney to make that judgment call. because often it's the places that you don't think, and we can make it seem, really great. So I would say don't make assumptions kind of across the board. Don't make assumptions that your criminal history doesn't matter. Don't make assumptions that you need more press in order to get started. Don't make assumptions that you need confirmed dates. I would just say don't make assumptions. And let's see, do I have any other? Read emails thoroughly. That's a big one. I would say read emails thoroughly and follow templates and instructions. And it's for the artist and the artist team's benefit, because the process can take forever if there is constant back and forth about, actually, we need this one more additional thing in the contract, or actually, that letter you wrote is missing this essential thing that we needed from you. If you read the emails thoroughly and follow the templates and instructions thoroughly, it will make the process easier, I promise.
Good advice. Shall we look at some questions in the chat, Jana?
Absolutely. So I think the best way to attack this is by me asking these simple, short answer questions that are more general. And then there's a few personalized and more in depth questions that I think we should open up the floor to. So I'll start going through the simple questions. And a couple of people have asked us regarding evidence in the press. Um, can they be small press platforms, and does it have to be in English?
It can be small press platforms. It can be small publications. It can be niche publications that are specialized for a certain genre or for a certain, type of performing. But and they absolutely do not need to be in English. We do need to file everything in English, which means that we'll require a translation with a signed translation oath from someone who's able to speak both languages. But often we are submitting almost whole press sections that are not in English and only have translations. But I will say about the strength of the publications that it does help if the publication, for example, has good stats on SimilarWeb. SimilarWeb is a website that measures visitors per month, total visitors, etc. That helps. It does help if there's a Wikipedia page for a publication or even a blog. It helps if we can find a list of best electronic music blogs and that publication's on there. Anything to sort of show the repute of that publication, even if it's like super niche, doesn't have a lot of viewers, anything that we can do that would strengthen it, for sure.
Great.
Wonderful. And um, we have a question also about a solo artist touring with hired musicians that are not a part of the solo artist project. Do they also require a visa if they're not part of the artist project?
I'm trying to understand that question. I think if that individual is asking about performers who are not part of the solo projects, forever, always, they're not like a long-term band, but they're part of the US work that the individual is performing, then yes, they will need an O2 visa. And that covers essential support staff for an O1. An O2 generally requires that the individuals have some previous working experience with the O1, but that could be rehearsing. That could be that they've spent months talking about the project and the creative, vision of the project, etc. And it requires that the O1 provide a letter, essentially explaining why each individual is needed for them to perform their US work. And it doesn't have to be a ton of writing, and we provide a very, very thorough template for people to do that. But essentially, you have to make an argument that in order for the O1 to perform their US work, this individual is needed.
Great. And in that same vein, A, do individual artists that are not commercial need a visa? And B, if you get invited to play for free, for example, do you need an artist visa?
What does an individual artist not being commercial mean?
Sophie, would you like to elaborate on that question?
Well, I can answer the second part for now. And remind me what that was. That was
If you ever get invited to play for free, or if you're an unpaid artist, do you still need a visa?
yes.
That's
Yeah.
a good question.
That's a
Yeah.
big misconception. I should have answered earlier to your question. You do. You do. There are very, very, very few exceptions to the work visa requirement. And you should, I said, don't make assumptions, but you should assume that you need a work visa unless very explicitly stated by an attorney. This is something when you asked about what we frequently see from artists, mistakes, or, however we want to call it, working in the US unauthorized without a work visa is, I'm just speaking for myself, is a mistake. And one should try to avoid it as best they can. It can really bite you in the behind in the future. And yeah, it can come up in the future and kind of follow an individual. It's not disqualifying in any way. We deal with this issue all the time, but it can pose a serious problem. So yes, even if you are unpaid, you should assume that you need a work visa. I will say, yeah, I'll leave it there actually.
And does the procedure differ if you're traveling by land versus air?
The procedure differs as far as like the actual process of, crossing the border, obviously, but it shouldn't with regard to any of the things that we talked about. Like it's not easier or harder. I don't feel comfortable making, a kind of blanket statement like that. And that's not what we see anyway.
Wonderful. And for testimonials, it is understood that the writer can't have any financial incentive in the artist or the group securing a visa. We're just a little uncertain about how broadly this applies, i.e., a past producer or a mentor on who might be allowable to make a testimony.
Yes, actually, that is a very good point. So testimonial letters should be written by people who don't seemingly have a financial interest or a material interest in an artist coming to the US. So if you are an artist agent, if you're an artist label, if you are an artist manager, those would be inappropriate people to write a testimonial letter. The whole point is that the government is asking you to present objective evidence that you have done the things that you've said in the petition. So it's asking an outside person within the field who has reason to be familiar with your work to essentially confirm everything that you've said. This person has performed at those festivals. This person has these streaming numbers. This person has done these things, and this is why it's important. That's the essential purpose of the testimonial letter. So when that author is closer to you and your working life, it just makes the letter seem less credible.
And for interviews, how much backup documentation are they asking for? Are they looking for everything from airline reservations, travelers' health insurance, or just proof of financial stability and ties to home country?
Usually it's different in every consulate and embassy, so I don't want to make any generalized statements. What is necessarily required is communicated to the individual in writing, generally by the consulate or embassy when you make your appointment. And that's typically not very much. It's your approval notice, it's your passport, It's a photo. We do encourage individuals, especially individuals, and I hate to say this, but from the global south and from countries that don't have strong diplomatic ties to the US. We do encourage people from those countries to bring evidence of ties to home. And especially under this administration, there's a new kind of fascination or obsession with people using public funds and the possibility that people will rely on public services once they get to the US, and also the possibility that people stay here and abuse the visa system. So you do want to show ties to home and ties to, I mean, financial stability if possible. And there are so many different ways that you can do that. You can show pay stubs, you can show your rent agreement, you can show a mortgage statement, you can show, really anything that you can think of that makes a case that a person wouldn't leave. That's helpful. And one more thing, I'm so sorry. The flights, and I don't see that. And I don't think other attorneys on our team see that very frequently, that consulates and our embassies are asking for, hard evidence of travel, etc. And we don't often recommend that people do that. I don't see how it would hurt to have it on you if you have it. I don't recommend bombarding an officer with a ton of documents. That's something I feel comfortable recommending against. We kind of know this for sure now over the years, that they don't like just being handed a ton of stuff to then review. I would give them what they ask for. And if you do feel like you're in a vulnerable position, for example, like the groups of people that I mentioned, individuals from the global south, individuals from countries that don't have close ties to the US, then maybe you proactively provide, evidence of your ties to home. But I would say only in those kinds of special situations. There are some embassies and consulates that require the entire petition, for example, and this is just an example of how much it varies across every consulate and embassy. Tokyo is one that we know asks people to actually print out the hundreds of pages of their petition and bring it with them to the interview.
Great. And in regards to entering USA when not working, does this mean a passport can also own an ESTA for tourist reasons? Sorry if that's a little unclear.
I think I understand. I think the person is asking if an individual can hold a work visa as well as an ESTA at the same time, and the answer is yes. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Absolutely.
And to clarify, this is pertaining our discussion today about immigrant visas only, not all visa types. So non-immigrant visas such as visitor or work visas are treated separately?
Sorry, I don't, if you can, where is that question? Because maybe if I read it, I will better.
Sure, it's the timestamp is 3:41 in the chat.
Okay.
From Maria.
From Maria. I don't see it, which means it probably was sent to you directly. Can you read it again? Sorry.
Sure. Would you please clarify? This is about immigrant visas only, not all visa types. Non-immigrant visas such as visitor or work visas are treated separately, right?
I am only talking about non-immigrant visas today. I've only been talking about temporary work visas. So immigrant visas are a whole other conversation that I haven't touched on. So actually the opposite is true, that I'm only discussing non-immigrant temporary work visas.
Okay, and just to be clear for everybody in the chat, the visas are in reference to touring artists hoping to go into the US for touring purposes. And then, oh, yeah.
Oh, I see. Maria is saying, yes, that's why the ban doesn't apply here. No, that's unfortunately not true. I wish it were, but the ban does apply to non-immigrant visas. Yeah, the travel ban as well as the USCIS pause. The full travel ban, so there are partially banned countries and then fully banned countries. The fully banned countries include non-immigrant temporary work visas, so including O&P visas. And then the pause, the USCIS pause, which is broader, it doesn't just, I know this is a lot of information and I'm so sorry it's confusing, but hopefully someone is following. The travel ban disallows people from getting the actual visa stamp in their passport. The USCIS pause disallows people from getting an approval or a response on a petition, that first step. So that does unfortunately affect O&P visa holders.
Great,
And if
thank
you
you.
have questions about those specific countries, we can follow up. You would have to look and see if they're on the 40 country travel ban list.
Great, thank you so much. And David would love for you to clarify. I know you sort of said a year, especially the estimated duration of processing. I know we touched on a year, but potentially even with premium, but he's just looking for a clearer answer. Do you want to just touch on that one more time?
I wish I could give a clearer answer. I wish they would give us a clearer answer. I actually you can check the wait time, and the USCIS will provide a wait time that 80% or oftentimes 75% of applicants in your visa category are taking for regular processing. We generally rely on what we actually receive as our data and statistics, and we haven't seen very many. I mean, I can think of a handful of petitions that have been approved in less than 10 months, in many, many months. So we have been quoting 10 to 12 months, if not more, in most cases.
And do artists have to consider how many streams in order to be considered for a visa, or show, a certain number of streaming? And what would that threshold be?
Yeah, we actually often use Loud and Clear, which is Spotify's like statistics service, their metrics section, and you can actually plug in monthly listeners and you can plug in total streams of a song and see how it ranks relative to all of the songs on the platform and all of the artists on the platform. And I mean, I've used things that have tens of thousands of streams and a couple thousand or tens of thousands of monthly listeners. We really only use Spotify when the statistics from Loud and Clear appear and like seem impressive. So you can check those out on your own, and yeah, you can check that out on your own.
And I know you were just discussing the full ban countries. What about restricted countries such as Tanzania that are partially but not fully restricted?
So Tanzania, if it's partially restricted, and I don't have all of 40 countries memorized on the total travel ban list, but if it is partially restricted, it would be subject to the USCIS pause, which means that a person born in or a citizen of Tanzania would currently be unable to get a response to a petition. But I want to just say that I don't know for sure that it's on the partial ban list because they change and I don't have them memorized. But if what that person is saying is true and it is on the partial ban list, then yes, it would be subject to the USCIS pause.
Thank you. And now I think in the effort of time management, we have a couple of sort of personalized questions or comments. So I'd like to open up the floor to Carmelinda. Carmelinda, if you'd like to come off mute and
Hi,
ask your
everybody.
question. Hi.
Thank you. I have something that I want to ask and something that I think could be really helpful to specifically Canadian artists. The question I have is, I moved to the US 4 years ago. I'm on my fourth P2, so it keeps getting extended. I am also in the process of getting my O1, but that has not been filed yet. We're in the earlier stages, almost ready to be filed. My question is, because I am currently in the United States and I received my new P2 extension, like it's actually physically here, do I still have to leave the country and re-enter to activate this? At the bottom of the P2 slip is a new I-94, which is until May of 2027. So do I have to leave? My lawyer basically said there's like a lot of documentation that you don't have to leave for an extension, only when it's your initial one. But I feel like there's some questionable feedback on that. What is your opinion?
Well, it's hard to say without knowing your exact situation, but I'll speak generally about one option for people who are transitioning from one visa classification to another and do not want to leave the US. You do have an option, generally speaking, to change status. And if you are currently on a P2 and you want to transition to an O1 and you don't want to go back to Canada, that would be a possibility and something to explore with your attorney. You know, it depends on your travel itinerary. If you're leaving the US, then, you know, this often doesn't make sense. If you're not applying with premium processing and the processing time is going to be very long, you have to make sure that you're here the whole time, et cetera, with very few exceptions. So it's worth bringing that up with your attorney if it's something that you want to explore with them.
I've been in conversation with him again. His answers are kind of vague. So I'm imagining that my case hasn't been filed before my current P expires. So imagining that we don't get that submitted before. The question I have is my new visa begins May 1st, 2026 until 2027 May. Do you feel that I should leave the country to in person activate this, or is it an automatic? Am I within the law? Let me say it like that. Am I within the law if I stay here? If my current I-94 has a previous date, because I prefer to stay in the country and not travel.
I unfortunately can't say. I'm very happy to, if you want to email me, I'll put my email in the
Cool.
chat right now. You can email me and, you know, I can see if I can give you an answer, but these things do really depend on your specific individual case. And there's a lot of variables and factors that go into making that assessment. So I can't say right now. I'm sorry.
And then I just wanted to share one thing that I think would be really helpful for my Canadian friends. The first P2 visa I got, it was such an easy process, and it was because I was a member of the Canadian Federation of Musicians. A friend told me to become a member. They have an alliance with AFM, which is the American Federation of Musicians. Ultimately, I got work in the US, so I had a contract like the one you mentioned earlier, quite non-binding in a way. I just basically needed the schedule of the days I was going to be performing with, you know, a signature from somebody in the position of authority at the company. That was all submitted to the Canadian Federation of Musicians for like $800. It was turned around. I got my P2 visa within 3 months. It's taking longer now. The more recent one, I had to pay premium processing because it is like 8 to 10 months now. But I just think for artists in Canada, if you want to work in the US, one of the initial things I highly recommend is that you become a member of the Canadian Federation of Musicians, which just really does a lot of the work for you at an extremely low cost. And it's really simple.
I will say that's really helpful because, you know, we don't I don't work on P2s, so I don't know much about that process. But I mean, beyond what everyone knows, but for for O and P visas, sorry about that. For O and P visas, we generally work with AFM to get the required union letter of no objection. And for musicians anyway, that's the American Musicians Union. And you don't really need to be a member. The costs, we've kind of put it together. It doesn't necessarily save people much, if at all, any money. So they have raised their cost recently for their expedited services, which takes about 2 to 3 days, I think, and it's $450 to get that letter. It's $300 if you want to go unexpedited, but we have it's a very, very streamlined, easy process for us.
Thank you so much. And I have Abby here who has a personal question as well. Abby, if you'd like to come off
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for doing this. So I work with the presenting organization, Savannah Music Festival. So we bring in a ton of artists from everywhere. My question more specifically is about our associate artistic director, who's from Britain. So I applied for his renewal, basically, of his 3-year O1 visa last year and show for 26, 27, 28, showing consistent work in his contract as our associate artistic director for those 3 years, and it ended up only being applied for or approved, excuse me, for 2026, and our season just ended. So basically, we got approved for a month out of the 3 years we originally applied for. So I'm wondering if there's kind of any standing we have to go on to figure out why it wasn't approved for the full 3 years, or if I'll have to just reapply again for 27 and 28.
I'm going to speak to the possibilities of maybe why that happened. And then unfortunately, I can't really speak to what avenues for recourse there are without knowing more, but we could talk about it if you wanted to email. But as far as truncating the visa validity, the petition validity period, we historically have seen that when itineraries are fairly blank, so when there's gaps, large gaps of 30 days or more between the US work, that is unexplained, that can often happen. Or, for example, if there's large chunks of time between paid US work. So, for example, I mean, I don't think that would be the case in what you're talking about, but it's useful for other artists to know that even if you have large chunks of time, and by large, I mean up to 4 months, chunks of time between US work engagements, you do want to fill in those gaps with explanations of what's going on, if not work in the US. So we often recommend, and I'm going to speak for touring artists because that's kind of the majority of people that I assume are here.
Of course.
We recommend that people fill those gaps in the itinerary with if you're touring in Europe, if you're doing festivals in South America, you're recording in the UK, that kind of information is very useful in trying to avoid a situation where it's truncated. So without having looked the itinerary you submitted, that's just some possible explanations for why that might have taken place. But that's so frustrating, and I'm sorry that happened. And we can talk if you want to email me about possibilities for going forward.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm guessing that is what it was, because he's in season once a year in March and April, and then the rest of the time he's remote working from home because he's also the director of a college and has his day job, so to speak. So I'm guessing that's probably the problem. We've just never run into that before. He's been with us for over 12 years. So it's just surprising.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth noting that the people who are examining these petitions, each of them is just an individual person, and they're extremely subjective often in how they enforce the regulations. So
got it. And then I had one more question regarding the time, kind of related to timeline. we worked one of our global music artists who from Ivory Coast but has lived in France for basically her entire life. So I'm not sure if Ivory Coast is on any of the lists because I also don't have it memorized.
It is, yeah.
Um, we didn't apply for her visa, but she did was doing it on her own. Applied for premium processing with in December, I'm sorry, November 25. As of March 26, we still didn't have an answer. Um, and so
Mm.
ended up having to cancel the show. So I just, if that's on one of the lists, I guess that is what the issue was.
Yeah, it sounds like it is what the issue was because Ivory Coast
Okay.
I can't remember if it's on the partial or the full,
Mhm.
unfortunately. I'm so sorry, but my
No,
memory
no.
is I often refer to these lists like every day I have a tab open on my computer just to
Right.
have it available. But yeah, Cote d'Ivoire is on.
Got it. Yeah. And that's what we were like, okay, how can this help inform our future planning so we aren't running into the same issues? But anyway.
Yes, if you are, organizing visas for people or helping them navigate, I recommend asking very early on in the process if anyone in need of a visa was born in or is a citizen of any of those countries.
Got it. Cool.
Thank,
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
thank you so much. And I hope we can make time for one final question. But before I say that, please note that Matthew Covey has added a link to a Google Doc form in the chat. I will link it again as the latest message. If your question was not answered, please fill out that form and we will get to your question. For anybody that had a personal follow up question with Kimya, her email address is also in the chat, which I will reiterate again. And for the final question today, JP, I know you had a question at the very beginning. Would you like to come off mute and ask?
Yes, of course. Well, I had several questions actually on the chat. I believe it's a little bit further down. I think it's been lost in messages, but it's more general. Maybe do you have to apply for a US visa for each of your artist project or only for one single person? That might be the first question I ask.
I'm not sure I understand fully. I'm so sorry, but if you can clarify, are you asking
If you
uh,
perform under different aliases or different
no. So if an individual works under different aliases, they can cover all of that work under one visa.
okay, perfect. And let's say you
Assuming,
get
sorry, I should clarify that. Assuming that all of that work is related to the same art form or medium or kind of work. So if all of it is musical, then all of that would be able to be covered by one visa.
sounds good. The second one was who needs to fill out the I-129 form when you get booked for a show in the US. Does the person who books who needs to fill it out? Do you have to fill it out?
Individuals are able to file petitions without an attorney. That is something that artists can do. I don't recommend that. Unfortunately, I, wish that weren't the case, but especially given where we are now in this administration and in this process, I highly, highly recommend that people seek out legal help and support when filing an I-129 and seeking an ORP visa or a temporary work visa at all. Yeah.
Perfect.
And I'll just say the reason why I feel very strongly about that is that the filing fees are very expensive. And if, for example, someone just gave an example of a person who filed a petition and has not yet received a response. And while in their case, it sounds like they filed the petition prior to USCIS's pause and then got kind of sucked into the pause while it was processing, that's definitely something that an individual would need, legal support and counsel on. It's a very difficult situation, and the policies are changing all the time. So that there's a lot of money that was spent in that filing, and I just want to make sure that artists aren't, getting unnecessary rejections or denials, etc.
Awesome, awesome. So for referrals, they can also be like someone who booked you, someone who has ties with you, someone who, like an audience member, for example, or any one of the sort, basically, for your petition, or does it really have to come from the people who book you in first hand?
So if you're talking about the work agreements and the showing future US work, that is distinct. But I think you might be talking about testimonial letters.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Referral,
Yeah.
testimonial
For
letters.
testimonial letters, it's best to have individuals who have maybe prior work experience with the artist. Yes, I think presenters who have worked with the artist in the past are great options. Anyone who has an ongoing working relationship with the artist, though, is not the best candidate for this for the reasons I described earlier. You just want the person to seem as objective and credible as possible. And if the person has a continuing working relationship with the artist, there's the possibility that the USCIS officer thinks, well, of course, this person's going to say great things about the artist, because if they come tour in the US, it benefits this person too. So some distance between the working relationship is best.
Okay, perfect. And the last one is it talks a lot about touring artists and stuff, but does it include also attending conferences or attending like I don't know, demo drops or like stuff like that? For example, Miami Music Week or like something like that, or can you go to those conferences with tourist visa or B1 visa, whatever you call it?
So generally speaking, and I can't speak specifically to any one conference or any one trip, etc., but generally speaking, B visas, so B visas cover, tourism and business, and ESTAs, if the person is ESTA eligible, cover things like attending a conference or taking business meetings or things that don't require you're not performing, you're not working, you're not writing, you're not in a studio, etc. And anything beyond that, I would say, and even that, I might seek out just some confirmation from an attorney just to ensure that the person does not need work authorization. But generally speaking, and you can look this up on, the government website, the types of things that B visas and ESTAs cover are the types of things that you just described.
Perfect. Because as a Canadian, I believe you can apply for B1 and B2 at the border. And if you go to those types of conferences, it should not be a problem as I did when I went to Miami earlier last month. So
Yeah,
I
if you're
believe it.
attending the conference, if you're performing at the conference,
That's a
then
different story. No. I
yeah.
attended the conference as an attendee and stuff. The Miami Music Week. Everyone in the community probably knows about it. So I
Yeah.
probably am good at this point.
Yeah, and I can't say for certain, because I would have to know exactly what you were doing, etc. But in general, yes, and you can look up, what is covered by a B visa as well as an ESTA if you're ESTA
Awesome.
eligible.
That answers everything for now. Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
Okay. How are we good, Jana, or
Yes, I think everything is in the chat. Of course, the recording of this session will be in the office hour archives for Covey Law. There's some links in the chat for where you can go to get more information. And of course, the form that you can fill out for Tamizdat, as well as Kimya's email, should be in the chat. So make sure that you've recorded that down before the call ends. And thank you so much for your time.
yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. All right. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And until the next masterclass, we'll be doing another one in about a month from now on a new topic. Okay. Thanks so much, Kimya.
Take care.
Okay. Bye, guys. Bye, everybody.